Our next speaker is Yolanda Westphalen Rodriguez, a literary critic who teaches at the Universidad de San Marcos in Lima, Peru. She has published 2 books on César Moro, and the title of her paper is Soma and Sema, Poetry of the Body in the Love Letters of César Moro.
Well, first of all, 2 things before starting. I would like to thank the Getty Research Institute and Rita for inviting me to participate, and all the staff and all the members of the research group. And secondly, I want to explain briefly that what I'm going to do with the PowerPoint. Because I don't read very well in English, then I have put like the main ideas, no? And some of the quotes I won't be able to read because of time limit. And well, I hope that is not going to be counted on my time because I'm just starting now. Yeah. I don't know how to start. Wait. Yeah, okay, thank you. Well, Moro's love letter, semiotics of the body and semiotics of passions. The purpose of this study is to establish an initial relationship between the love confessions in Moro's letters to Yolanda Westphalen, the letters to Antonio, the collection of poems La Tortuga Equestre, and the poem Lettre d'amour. Texts in general project rationality, a direction, an order, an intentional form, even a structure, at a pragmatic as well as at a passional and cognitive level. I'm using passional. I know that in English it's passionate, but it's like a semiotic word that I'm going to be using. In the paper, we are interested in the passional dimension, in establishing the relationship between Soma and Sema in Moro's love letters. In the search for the logic of affections and passions in the above-mentioned text, we have assumed the analytical and methodological perspective of the discursive and body semiotics. The idea proposed is that Moro's poetry and love letters reveal the somatic presence of a cosmic body, the body of the loved one, and the transformation of the poet-lover into a phantasm, whose fantasy is to transform himself into a shadow, to become one forever with love itself. Words are turned into an indescribable scream of both the passional intensity of the poet's love and the cognitive acknowledgement of what unrequited love means. Love is fire, leaving traces on the body of the text itself, turning, as Palin's fumage did, destruction into beauty. The deep Sema coming out of Moro's love writing is that love is a cosmic explosion, an orgy of the senses that turns the lover's life into turmoil, centripetal cosmogonic force that envelops and possesses him. The lover is in love with love, and when he cannot get hold of it, he evades the reality of unrequited love, or rather, transforms his hallucinatory psychosis of desire into the pathology of melancholy. We will start with the poem of Antonio because we believe this is discursively the basic test. In it, Antonio's figure updates the axiological universe, a pantheistic universe in which Antonio is God, but God is everything and everything is God, which is the same as saying that the world is identical to Antonio, or in a way, an expression of love. The poem determines that everything is a single being, and that all other forms of reality and history are either forms of this being or identical to it. Formally, the poem, due to its tone and its song-like and praise-like characteristic, is a kind of hymn, a litany sung to God Antonio, a concurrent incarnation of Eros, the god of love in the theogonies of Greek mythology and of the pre-Columbian god. What type of hymn does Moro compose? What is the nature of his song? It is an unrhymed free-verse poem, but with a litany-like rhythm produced by reduplication, by the 28 repetitions of the Antonio anaphor that defines the nature of the god. In the last verse, Mexico grows around Antonio, The ritual space on which the god is erected is created, Mexico. Antonio is God. Antonio is the sun. Antonio can destroy the world in an instant. Antonio makes the rain fall. Antonio can make the day dark or light up the night. Antonio is the origin of the Milky Way. And finally, Mexico grows around Antonio. The pattern it follows is one of the emphasis and euphoric amplification. The metaphors it contains turn Antonio into a cosmic god incarnated in the four elements of nature. It is the origin of the universe, of the stars, of our galaxy. It takes up the world's entire history and prehistory. It is a force of nature, a colossus, and represents power and dominant figures in all the dynasties of kings, Inca, pharaohs, and emperors. He is a phallic god and demon, beautiful night demon, implacable tiger of star-like testicles, great black tiger of inexhaustible semen. The apotheosis of the sensorial universe of the letters to Antonio becomes in Lettres d'amour the universe of thought and memory, of the past in the present. The poetic speaker writes to the addressee of this letter, tells him he remembers his feet, his body, his face, his absence, and his landscape, and talks about the role of words with the sole purpose of spelling out the loved name as well as the absolute impossibility of erasing what is written in permanent ink. What is the path that leads from the orgastic sensation to the blue and melancholic thought, from the cosmic Eros to the melancholic Eros? Moro's letters addressed to Yolanda Westphalen enable us to follow the textual genesis of the transformation from the tone of apotheosis in the poem Antonio to the personal, intimate, and heartbreaking tone in the Lettres d'amour, in reference to which Moro once said to his friend, "In order to feel it, one will have to read it in a single sob. It is too intimate. Think of a letter addressed to someone." Proprioception. Semiotics takes discourse rather than sign as its basic unit of analysis. According to Jacques Fontany, the body and perception are central in the signifying process, because the perceiving body that takes a position in the world of meaning unites the two planes of language, the interior plane, which belongs to the order of content, and the exterior plane, which belongs to the order of expression. Semiosis is proprioceptive because it is through the role of the body that we grasp both. Therefore, signification is just as affective, emotive, and passional as it is conceptual or cognitive. One of the characteristics in Moro's poems and letters is the polysensorial and synesthetic dimension present in his enunciation. The meaning is revealed in the way the sensorial orders and sensorial mobility of the body itself take part in Moro's poetic and epistolary discourse. In the first letter to Antonio, dated 25th January 1939, love is located in the temporary dimension of the night in which a commotion, an agitated, disorderly, and noisy confusion of the senses is announced. Love in the night, a roar is announced, a roar at the shedding of blood. The simile analogically relates this sensorial disorder to the noise made by the pouring of blood. Sound and smell overlap in creating the semantic life-death isotopy. Blood is linked to the heart, and the latter to the principle of life that springs from the internal beating of the heart sensation. A pulsation perceived as the movement of life itself, according to Fontany. In pre-Columbian and Aztec civilization, religions and rituals, blood is not only perceived as a liquid. When ripping out the heart, the Aztecs identified the heart as the vital center par excellence. Love, linked to the figure of giving the heart, or the idea of ritual sacrifice, symbolically links love to the principle of life, and the lack of love to the idea of death and emptiness. The third paragraph of this letter links the heart to breathing. The heart barely breathes upon the sudden miracle of your presence. The relationship between exhaling and the vital principle that breathing recreates at each moment is also marked by the semantic life-death isotopy. In fact, just like the heart and blood, Breath is associated with life and death. The last breath, the soul that escapes with it, are well-known reasons. I'm in your blood and breath, nothing can erase me. It's also from Fontaigne. Life is located, in the letter, it is stated that if one can barely breathe, it is because the discovery of love takes one to the verge of death, like in Amour à Mort, the title of one of Moro's poetry collection published after his death. The presence of the loved one implies the virtual disappearance of the lover. Both in the letters to Antonio, as well in Moro's correspondence to Yolanda Westphalen, the intimate movement of the flesh, the heartbeats, and the respiratory movement inherent in the sensory motor control are joined to the synesthetic orgy of the sound and smell of blood, shed in sacrifice to transmit us the microcosmic and macrocosmic sensation of love. Love is a vital breath. The force of gravity is a planet's tail movement that pierces me. Well, this last quote is from this long letter, but I'm not going to read it. No? The act of breathing, ergo of living, is synonymous to loving, because man cannot conceive or confront the idea of the absence of love and death. Bathing in black light implies sensing the light with a touch, plunging into it, but it's an oxymoron, a light characterized by the absence of light, a light that does not allow seeing. Discursively, the contact of the skin with the water makes one lose sight of a possible future. The lover refuses to accept the possibility that at one point in his body will not be attracted by the force of gravity of the lost one meteorite-like black exploding body. It is a body that hits and leaves traces. It is a body that causes the lover to flow and fall like rain, to turn into a source of inner emanations. The movement of his body inside his own body is the only thing capable of providing the total and perfect achievement. None of the properties of the polysensorial semiotic field belong exclusively to one of the senses. The sense of hearing, smell, and taste share properties. The meaning that is elicited from other sensitive contact with the world modalities expands Moro's understanding of feeling love, the eidetic relationship between light and shadow, the tactile feeling of the body's volume, and the tactile, gustatory, and sensory motor combination of the act of devouring tells us of love as the equivalent of the origin of all senses. The eyes would like to keep forever the color of the fire burning in your eyes, the gleam in your eyes, the exact volume of your body, and devour you, wrap you up, and hide you from all looks. In the words of Yolanda Westphalen, after reading this, one feels crushed and trampled on by love's wild beasts, heartbroken by the infernal breath exhaled by the love poem and the beauty. They are the insane extremes needed for lightning to strike and join, destroy, and regenerate the lovers. In Moro's poetry and epistolary, Antonio is the sun, the source of light, of immeasurable brightness and joy. But the brightness and joy are fleeting, just like the presence of the loved one. The only way to maintain this relationship is to become a luminous reflection, a shadow, because the latter is inseparable from the source creating it. I will be your shadow and the water for your thirst with eyes. Why don't you want to turn me into a piece of your shadow, or into your breath, or into a particle of your thoughts? The blindness of love can be due to excessive light at the luminous hour of the absence of it. The extremes of light exposure or its absence produce the invisibility of the loved one body and diminish the poetic speaker to the condition of a silhouette, whose only way to cling to the presence of the loved one is to become its casting. Positional field. The relationship between the own body and the positional field created by it is key in revealing the sensorial ways of comprehension and the discursive syntax of the passions. Moro defines this relationship based on the proximity, distance, spatial dimension, and the present-past temporal dimension. Proximity is linked to warmth, to the possibility of touching the body of the loved one or being touched by him. to the possibility of feeling the smell and sound of his voice. In short, to the presence of the loved one. Distance is linked to coldness, silence, and absence, to a sort of cosmic deafness. The sensitive body is one that arranges the field and self-appoints itself as a position. These are some quotes that show the idea of proximity and distance. The sensitive body is the one that arranges the field and self-appoints itself as a position. The appearance of a strong intensity in the horizon, Antonio, indicates at the same time the formation of the position field of alterity. The depth of the field is the sensitive distance perceived between the center and the horizons, the movement between both. The own body explores its field, but at the same time it displaces its horizons and defines them in relation to such alterity. The horizons and the depth of the field to which the poem and letter refers are cosmic. They are the big bang of the initial explosion created by the loved one, but it is not about an expansive way. Antonio's lightning bolt stride, a metaphoric apocalyptical horse that rides down the avenue of the gods, where the Milky Way is springing from his penis ends, causes a whirlwind and turns the strong wind into hurricane. Antonio's trajectory transforms dispersion into a concentric movement, turning direction, range, rhythm, and speed into hurricane, a centripetal force which the lover creates an enveloping field around the loved one. The auditory sphere is privileged by Moro because it takes us to a horizon for appearances and disappearance. The auditory field is a sphere whose core is the flesh. It is a sensation caused by another body and has two limits, silence and pain. In the middle of the auditory field is the universe of words. I love, I wait. This is what my life boils down to, waiting for a word not addressed to me, a word I interpreted and mull over. He wrote that to one of the letters, in one of the letters to Yolanda Westphalen. The relationship between the positional actants is reciprocal. Sound has a source, another body, around which an audible sphere is formed. It also has a target, the body flesh it perceives as located in the center of the auditory sphere. Reciprocity is complete with reversibility. The reversibility of the auditory sphere implies simultaneously because it indicates co-presence, coexistence of sensorial plurality request. In Moro, euphoric states are linked to the presence of the loved one and the dysphoria to pain produced by silence and the lack of reciprocity from the loved one, to the sound that lost in the cosmic path until it becomes inaudible. Passional schema. Discursively, both the poem to Antonio as well as the letter we study create a tensive schema of amplification in which the increase in intensity, both euphoric and dysphoric, combines with the development of extension, creating an affective cognitive tension, the intensity of love passion, and the awareness of the lack of love. The scheme of amplification generalizes in the principle of progression that stems from a minimum intensity and a weak extension to a maximum tension. The schema consists in emphasis. Moro's poems and his letters create a scenario of permanent emotional intensity, the paroxysm of passion, an orgy of the senses, or the cosmic emptiness. The intensity of euphoric emotion is created by the explosion of the emotional shock generated by a centripetal wave, the hurricane of chain metaphors and figures of reiteration that regroup and reproduce the state of initial emotional shock and intensify it. The intensity of dysphoria is linked to the idea of disappearance, dispersion, and emptiness. Cognitive dimension. The cognitive dimension in semiotics designates the universe of knowledge to the extent that it can become a narration. It is sufficient for two actors not to have the same knowledge about an object for this modality to become a valuable object. Cognition aspires to the senses, creating knowledge of on the principle of discovery. For there to be logic in cognition, the change should be grasped through the comparison between two worlds, a comparison that allows measuring the discovery and the supplement of knowledge acquired through it. What are the two worlds compared by Moro? The intensity of his infatuation and Antonio's indifference and coldness. The knowledge revealed to him with bitterness and desperation is the lack of love or lack of intensity in Antonio's love. I dreamed you are leaving, abandoning me, as if something that never has been accepted can be abandoned, because you have never accepted me. You have never wanted to know anything about me. Letter 4 to Antonio. The cognitive extension that arises from the love cyclone that envelopes Moro, the deep schema he reveals through the cognitive root of the letters to Antonio and his other texts, is that the love he knows is that of the absence of love arising from unrequited love. The options he has are the fantasy of ideal love or the melancholy of unshared love and loneliness. This is a quote from one letter to Emilio Adolfo. Unrequited love, the only love I know. The other does not belong to me. One literally lives in famine, famine of everything. This is what I share. That is my star. The semiotic square can be illustrated as follows. The fantasy of unrequited love, the passion of his infatuation, the indifference of inexistence and emptiness, and the melancholy of confronted with the lack of love of his lover. The next part of the analysis deals with the meaning linked into the figurative, which overflows the simple referential representation. Thematizing consists in recognizing a more abstract underlying isotopy, the figurative content that condense and guide the global meaning. Moro's letters and poems contain a figurative, thematizing on the figurative based on the concept of destruction and beauty, and those of pain and love, a relationship that is paired to the conception underlying balanced fumage technique. In Moro's case, beauty is linked to the capacity of recreating through poetic words the destructive force of love's fire and the unpredictable expression of the traces of pain the latter leaves in the lover. Poetry represents the threshold between life and death. Liminality between love and pain represents the space where the orgastic sensation becomes melancholy and horror and pain turn into beauty. In the poem Antonio, the letters addressed to him, and in the ones from Moro to Emilio Adolfo, the poetic experience of space is highly important. Just like the pictorial concept of cosmogony that Palin starts developing, it is an emotional synthesis between the microcosmos and the macrocosmos. The human presence represented in a sensitive body is what binds the infinitely great with the infinitely small. The cosmic turmoil of love with the sensory universe of the eyes, the gleam in the look, the quiet rumor of steps, and the exact volume and warmth of the loved one's body. Moro's poetry creates a sort of emotional magnetic field, an inner self and multi-dimensional space without horizons. From his arrival in Mexico in 1938 until his return to Lima 10 years later, Moro collaborates with Wolfgang Pallen, and both organize the International Surrealist exhibition in Mexico together with Breton, and the Peruvian becomes one of the main collaborators on the magazine Din. Beyond the bonds of friendship, Moro's poetry and Pallen's plastics art converge and coexist in time and reveal mutual affinities and influences. There is a polyphonic dialogue of peers between Moro's synesthetic and polysensory poetry and the conception underlying the fumage technique and Pallen's cosmogonic vision. Figurativity and the phantasm theory. Closely related to the figurative theming of fumage and cosmogony, there is another underlying series of parallel isotopies, the epistolary game of absence and presence, the appearance and disappearance of the loved one, the lover's desire to transform into a shadow and a lost soul, semantic isotopies that relates Moro's poetic work and epistolary with the phantasm theory. Correspondence is in itself, and rhetorically speaking, a phantasm, as it is about the absentee speech simulating a conversation. The game of absence and presence, appearance and disappearance, the hope to communicate despite loneliness and temporary difference, textually creates a phantasmatic image that does become the symbolic key in epistolary communication. The phantasm of Morian love is indissolubly associated to the idea of appearance, absence, visibility, invisibility, and to the transit between life and death, To study the axiological universe of the conception of love in Moro implies revealing the polysensorial relationship between the body that feels and the pantheist erotic universe, between melancholy and the fantastic faculty, and between these elements with the general fantasy theory. In the text study, the object of love is love itself. It is analogically identified with the cosmos and all forces of nature and history. How do you access this cosmic love? How do you own it? Through the paroxysm of the presence and exaltation of all the senses it produces. The images of a volcano that combines fire and earth, and the whirlwind that mixes water and wind, turn all natural elements into an expression of desire, one who has to live immersed in the senses, hedonist pleasure and sex. I'm free from desire. I live inside it and be in it. I do not suffer from it. I only live within desire. That was in a letter to Antonio. And in a letter to Emilio Adolfo. And life with its filthy roar, its stupid concert of reality, the need strangling all desire in the egg, the only pure force of life. In the hallucinatory psychosis of desire, Moro seeks to get hold of something that otherwise he would not be able to get or enjoy. He evades the reality of unrequited love, or rather, transforms such reality into the melancholic introjection of his own image of love to the loved one. Thanks to a fetishist perversion, the loved one becomes love itself. The poet explores the unreal, the inappropriate, in order to apprehend reality and be turned into the positive. The lover is in love with love. But do we love someone for what he is or what he means in our life? This apparent double question is only one, since that someone means everything in our life for what he is, right? So the question is not even posed. It is a vicious circle. This hallucinatory psychosis of desire intimately links erotic pathology to melancholy. The infatuation process becomes a mechanism that unhinges and subverts balance. The melancholic disorder is the result of this contradictory desire to try to embrace the ungraspable. The lover aspires to melt himself in the unequivocal whole of the loved one's presence. He wants to overcome the duality of the two halves and become the loved one's shadow. But for this purpose, he must nullify the moments of absence. The permanent absence and the need for the loved one is what plunges the lover into an abyss of melancholy and emptiness. Antonio is the object of the melancholic lover's desperation and of the fetishist denial in which desire denies and affirms its object at the same time. Poetics. In order for words to be able to seize the wealth and multiplicity of the senses and to transmit these drives, I forgot. In other words, to be able to seize the wealth and multiplicity of the senses and to transmit these drives, the normal rules of word have to explode. This is the function of surrealist poetry, to empty words from all traditional use value and place them in an unusual relationship whose meaning can only be seized at the level of the system as a whole. The literary resources it appeals to in order to achieve such effect of estrangement from the artistic object and the clash with traditional rules go from the use of the paradox of a litany that repeats a huge chaotic list in the poem Antonio to the recourse of the dominant synesthetic metaphor in the poems La Tortuga Equestre and Lettre d'amour, and from there to the fragments of the love speech immersed in the conversational flow of biographical diction texts such as the letters and later diaries from Moro to Westphalen. Thus, love, like poetry, opens a new dimension in knowledge and allows him to read reality with sulfur eyeglasses. Thank you.